I have the honor to introduce Ilan Pappé. He is one of the most famous historians of Israel. He is a representative of the new historians that have been working on documents that were delivered by the British and Israeli government in the 80s, and studying these documents and giving a new version of the Israeli and Palestinian history. Then he was at the University of Haifa until 2007. He had a lot of problems there, academic and political. In fact, he was a leading member of the Hadash party, and then was a candidate, 2 times candidate at the next set. But for his work, his version of... ¿No funciona? ¿Está abierto? Sí, pero... Better now? Yeah? Yeah? Not well, then because of his work as historian in Israel, he had a lot of problems, academic and political, and then he left Israel in 2007. He went to the British University, and now he's based in Exeter University. He's now in the College of Social Science and International Studies at the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom, and director of the university's European Center for Palestinian Studies. At the same time, he has been a peace activist. He's a leading member, too, of the BDS campaign. Then he supports the economic and political boycott to Israel, including an academic boycott. And he has a very extensive work on this Palestinian and Israel history. Especially, he has been writing the history concerning the creation of Israel in the 1948 and the expulsion of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in '84. No? We can highlight among his work the books, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, The Modern Middle East, A History of Modern Palestine, One Land, Two People, Britain and the Arab-Israeli Conflict, Progressive Genocide in Palestine and the BDS, or The Biggest Prison on Earth, is one of the last works of Ilan Pappé. Well, we're very proud, and it's an honor to have you there, and people are waiting and expecting your conference.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. That's what you should have done. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Laura, for your kind introduction and for moderating this event. I will speak for about half an hour and so to leave enough time for questions and comments. Great pleasure to be here. I see that my voice came back because one lady gave me a magic pill. I hope it's not going to change my views, but it did. There you are. Thank you. It really worked because I lost my voice, but I found it back. This is great. What I would like to do in this half an hour, because among other things that I'm doing, as Laura mentioned, I am a director of the European Center for Palestine Studies at the University of Exeter. This was the first time that a Center for Palestine Studies, an academic Center for Palestine Studies, was established in the West. Until now, until we did it in Exeter, there were quite a few Center for Israel Studies, but there was no Center for Palestine Studies inside universities. There were institutes outside the university that, like in Washington, the Institute of Palestine Studies that publishes the Journal of Palestine Studies. But academia was afraid to recognize the study of Palestine as a subject, as a legitimate subject. And in fact, when I wanted to establish the center, the pressure on me at the beginning was that I would call it the Center for Israel and Palestine Studies. And I said, no, this is a center that studies a country, not a state. The name of the country is Palestine. The name of the state is Israel. In the 4,000 years of history of Palestine, Israel is 72 years. It's less than a comma in a long history. So we call it Palestine because this is what the world used to call the country. This is not saying that we will not teach about Israel, the foundation of Israel, the politics of Israel, society of Israel, but we want to include it within the study of a country called Palestine. And as you know, these are not neutral issues. And even the British government intervened to try and convince us to call it a Center for Israel and Palestine Studies. But we didn't give in. We decided, and I'm happy to say that today there are 8 centers for Palestine studies around the world. So we really did something important here. And I'm very proud of it. And what we mainly do, we want to encourage postgraduate students, MA, doctorate students, to work on Palestine. Because we think that the young generation of academics, whether they are Palestinians, whether they are pro-Palestinians, whether they are interested in Palestine, have a lot to contribute to the future of Palestine. I don't have to tell you that the political elite of the Palestinians is in a crisis. It is not functioning. It is disunited. It fights each other. It is not representing the Palestinians properly, and it's not only its fault, it's the reality on the ground that does not allow people who are under occupation and colonization to strategize properly for the future. So I think the young generation of Palestinian activists, academics, intellectuals can play a very important role in trying to push forward the project of saving Palestine and the Palestinians. And one of the things, and this is what I would want to share with you, one of the things that the young academics who work in my center and other centers have brought to our study of Palestine is an old concept that many Palestinians talked about it in the past, but didn't seem relevant at the time, and becomes more and more relevant for our times. And this is the concept of settler colonialism. I don't know how you say in Spanish, settler colonialism. Yeah, but it's not colonialism. What I mean, there's a difference between classical colonialism, when Spain built colonies around the world, or Britain, and settler colonialism. Settler colonialism is different from classical colonialism in several ways. It's a movement, when we talk about settler colonialism, we are talking about people who left Europe not in the service of the empires, but because they felt that Europe was not safe, because they were persecuted, whether these was Catholics who were in a Protestant environment, or whether these were Protestants in a Catholic environment, and whether these were Jews who suffered from anti-Semitism. Europeans, not only Jews, Europeans who wanted to be part of Europe had to leave Europe. Had to leave Europe because if they stayed, they faced extermination. Not only the Jews, there were other groups in history. And what they do is quite natural. They look for another place outside of Europe, and they want to build a new Europe in that place. In English, we can say it nicely. Maybe it also translates nicely to Spanish or Catalan, I don't know. They were not only looking for a new home, they were looking also for a new homeland. They wanted to define themselves as a new nation. But they were Europeans. When the first people from Spain came to Latin America, they spoke the same accent as in Madrid. We know that afterwards something else developed. The same is true about the people who left Liverpool and went to North America. They had two problems, settler colonialists, which is also true about Zionism. One was they needed an empire to support them. They could not do it by themselves. And quite a few of the settler colonial movements were assisted by Britain. And what is interesting, that the interest of the settler communities and the British Empire at one point clashed. And when it clashed, the settlers began a war against the empire. And there's something very interesting. The war of the white settlers in North America and the war of the white settlers, the war of the white settlers in North America against Britain, the war of the white settlers in South Africa against the Britain, and the war of the white settlers in Palestine against the Britain are all called the War of Independence. Independence from whom? From the British Empire. Because they needed the empire but didn't want it anymore. But this was not the big, as you know, this was not the biggest problem for the settlers. The biggest problem for the settlers, and this is true about Central America, South America, Australia, New Zealand, not only Palestine, Algeria. The problem was that someone already lived in the place where they wanted to build a new life. We call them the native people, the indigenous people. And there was a great scholar of settler colonialism who unfortunately died a few years ago, Patrick Wolfe, who wrote a very good article under the title, The Logic of the Elimination of the Native. The logic of the elimination of the native. In this article, he said that from the settlers' point of view, and this is true about the Zionist movement as well, the only way to deal with the fact that someone else already lives in the country where you want to create a new life for yourself, the only way is to remove the native. In some places, the elimination of the native was genocide, as happened to the Native Americans in the north, in the center, and in the south, as happened to the Aboriginals in Australia, the Maoris in New Zealand. In other cases, the removal was not necessarily genocide, as in the case of South Africa, where apartheid was used as a way of getting rid of the native, or as I claim in my work in Palestine, ethnic cleansing, by moving by force the Palestinians outside of Palestine. The history, if you accept this idea of Zionism as a settler colonialism, it really affects the whole way you see the history of Palestine in the last 100 years. It also affects the way you see the future, not just the past. So let me do a very quick visit to the past. I'm an historian. I see people sit like this. I cannot avoid giving you a history lecture. It's my DNA. I see people sit nicely and they cannot move. I know they have to, some history at least. And in fact, one of the problems we have with the media, not only in this country, but in the West, that the media is not interested in history. They don't have the patience. And you cannot understand what goes on today in Palestine and Israel if you don't historicize the analysis. If you don't explain the historical context, you will never understand. But the media doesn't have the patience. As you know, when they give you history on television, and I'm sure it's true in Catalonia, as it is true in Madrid, as it's true in London, they do it in 2 minutes. You know, this was the land, Jesus was here, the Jews came, the Arabs came, and now there's a conflict. We need a very elaborate understanding, and it's very difficult to take people on such a journey, but I will do it very quickly. Because I believe Zionism was a settler colonialist movement, and I try to prove it in my work, the real obsession Zionism had, apart from saving Jews from anti-Semitism in Europe, which was a very noble idea, and they were right, because Jews in Europe did eventually suffer from the Holocaust and genocide, that they were right to look for a way outside of Europe. This was, one should give them the credit that when other Jews were saying, no, don't worry, it will be okay, the Zionists were very clear that anti-Semitism can be disastrous. And in this case, they were right. But once they have decided not only to leave, but where to leave to, Zionism became from a movement that saves Jews from anti-Semitism into a settler colonial movement. And when it became a settler colonial movement, its major problem was the native population of Palestine, not the anti-Semites in Europe anymore. And like any settler colonial movement, and you can see it from the way they write, from the way they talked, from what they did, they wanted as much of Palestine as possible, with as few Palestinians in it as possible. They didn't have the opportunity to do it when they just arrived. They were too small, they were too weak, they had other concerns. But from the 1930s onwards, we can see that the Jewish settlers become 1/3 of the population, 1/3 of the population. So they feel strong enough to think in more strategic terms. And on top of it, the rise of Nazism and fascism in Europe gives them the moral idea that now they even have the moral right to go further in their ideas of how to deal with the native population of Palestine. And they wait for the right opportunity, and the right opportunity came in 1948, when Britain decided to leave Palestine. And they were looking for a way of using this historical moment to get rid of as many Palestinians as they could. Of course, I'm doing here a crash course. This was not straightforward. This was not easy. You had to take into account the international community. The international community talked about what we will call today a two-state solution. They said, no, you cannot have the whole of Palestine. We will have to partition Palestine. The Zionist leadership very cleverly said, yes, we are willing to take only part of Palestine, realizing that the Palestinians would say no, and preparing for taking over the whole of Palestine. And as I try to show in my book, The Ethnic Cleansing in Palestine, it's around February 1947 that the Zionist movement has a very clear vision. And within 2 years, from February 1947, I would say, to February 1949, they succeed in expelling half of Palestine's population. Think about Spain. Never think, when you hear about expulsion of people, don't do a psychological mistake and think about absolute numbers. Then you will never understand what happened. Because then you will say, oh, they expelled only 750,000 people. You know, so many people were expelled in Europe in the Second World War and after, and then you make it less important. But if you think about someone who would come in 1948 to Spain and kick out half of the people who live in Spain outside of Spain, and destroy half of all the Spanish villages and almost all the Spanish cities and towns, and they will do it within 9 months, or 2 years, but most of the work was done in 9 months. The world would know about this. You cannot hide in 1948 such a huge operation. And the world would say, okay, what can we do, because this is the best compensation for the Holocaust. The world will know about it, would not do anything about it, and would then legitimize the state that was founded on the ethnic cleansing as a member not only of the United Nations, but as a member of the civilized world. And the Palestinian reaction to this ethnic cleansing would immediately be regarded as terrorism, as illegitimate, immoral, and unacceptable. If you understand this, you begin to understand why there's still bloodshed today in Palestine. Because this is something which is not easy to accept if you are a Palestinian. Now, because of Palestinian resistance, because of Arab states' involvement, and because the Jewish army had its limits, they did not succeed in expelling everyone from Palestine. They also, the Zionist leadership believed that the Palestinian refugees, as David Ben-Gurion put it, half of them would die and half of them would forget. This didn't happen. In the refugee camps, the Palestinians were reborn as a Palestinian national movement. And they never gave up. From the first moment they arrived in a refugee camp, they never gave up the idea of coming back home, as you know. Not they, not their children, not their grandchildren. This is something the Israelis did not take into account. So immediately they decided to describe this whole refugee issue as, on the one hand, only humanitarian problem. The Arab world should accept these refugees and forget about them. And if they resist, it's terrorism, and Israel should recruit the world against terrorism and delegitimize totally the Palestinian national movement. And therefore, but what we know, which is more important, is that half of the Palestinian population, that's the good news from Palestine's point of view, half of the Palestinian population remained in Palestine. We talked about the half who were expelled, but the half remained in Palestine. And Israel continued and continues to this very day the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. They cannot do what they did in 1948. They cannot expel almost 1 million people anymore. This is 2019. They couldn't do it in 1967 either. There was television. There was support for the Palestinians in some important parts of the international community. So they went for what I call in my books from ethnic cleansing to incremental ethnic cleansing. That is gradual, stage by stage. I think only if you are an Israeli Jew like myself, who was part of the establishment, who was educated. I'm not a good product of the education, for sure. I don't think my head teacher would say, "Oh, Ilan Pappé was my student." No, he actually said, I hardly remember him. He was in the class, but he didn't talk much, which is not true, by the way. As you can see, talking is not one of my problems. But anyway, coming back to the point, I think because I was part of it, I understand exactly this idea that you educate the whole society to look at the native Palestinian as a problem, as an issue, not as human beings. I'm not saying that every Zionist Jew does not see Palestinians as human beings. I'm not demonizing them all. But the educational orientation is to see every Palestinian as a potential terrorist. This is why in Israel today, as you know probably, there is a segregation in the educational system. There's an apartheid in the education system in Israel, and not at the university level, up to the high school. We have an Arab educational system and a Jewish educational system. You cannot become a teacher in an Arab school in Israel if the Secret Service does not say it's okay for you to become a teacher, which is not something you have to do when you want to be a teacher in a Jewish school. In a Jewish school, you are a teacher because you have a BA in education. But anyway, it doesn't make you a good teacher, but it doesn't matter. But they think it makes you a good teacher. On the Palestinian side, on the Arab-Israeli side, you need the Secret Service. And the Secret Service follows everything that goes in the classroom. So every now and then we hear about teachers being arrested or called to the police because they put a Palestinian flag in the class or gave the Palestinian narrative of the events. This DNA, this mentality, this perception of the of the Palestinians, as Benjamin Netanyahu called it, as a demographic bomb, as a demographic bomb. Dealing with them as a demographic problem is the beginning of ethnic cleansing. Because if I talk to a class of mine in the University of Haifa, and my class had 50% Jewish students and 50% Palestinian students, if the Palestinian students are a demographic problem, I'm already thinking, how do I solve this problem? Right? I'm not thinking about the Jewish students as a problem. But the Palestinian, I can convert them to Judaism, maybe. That's one way. But Jews don't like to convert others, unlike the Christians. The Jews don't like to have new members of the family. I don't know why, but let's not go there. So if I'm not converting them, what else can I do with them? Now, I'm not saying that removing them by force is the only solution. But, for example, I can force them to stay in their villages. I can give them less infrastructure. I can put the Secret Service on them day and night. I can immediately silence them if they dare to say that they have national ambitions. I can do apartheid roads for them in the West Bank. I can build a wall around them and a fence around them in Gaza. And I can expel them, maybe one person a week. For example, I'll give you one area where this, what I call incremental ethnic cleansing, is working, because Israel is a settler colonial movement, is the Greater Jerusalem area. Israel wants the Greater Jerusalem area to be Jewish. And they already colonized the post-67 Jerusalem. There are already 200,000 Jewish settlers in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem. 200,000. But there are still 200,000 Palestinians. According to Haaretz newspaper, from 1967 until today, by means of administration, by, for example, telling people you didn't pay a car ticket, you violated building permit, you left the country for too long, you are traveling too much to Ramallah. By these means, Israel expelled from the Greater Jerusalem area 300,000 Palestinians. That's why there are only 200,000 here now. This, they call it Judaization, to turn an Arab area into a Jewish area. I don't have to tell you, but maybe I should say, that these kinds of policies and actions are criminal. There are severe violations of international law. There are crimes against humanity. Ethnic cleansing is a crime against humanity. The Spanish consul in East Jerusalem, I can assure you, I know, I don't assure you, I know, whoever he is now and whoever he was before, they sent very pedantically monthly report to the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, recording every act of expulsion, house demolition, arrest without trial, all the violations. I can assure you, if you will have access to the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, this would be one of the best records for an historian for the violations of human rights and abuses of human rights in Israel, in a Greater Jerusalem area, from 1967 until today. But if you will ask the Director General of the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as I did, what are you doing with this material? He says, for the time being, we put it there. We're not using it. Why they're not using it, we leave it to another lecture, why they're not using it. But don't believe for a moment that they don't know, or that they don't have a moral judgment about it. They have. They know that this is a severe violation of the human rights of the Palestinians. What they don't understand, I think, or they don't want to understand, because I think they are intelligent people, is what I'm trying to tell you this evening. That these violations are part of the nature of settler colonial movements. That's what I'm trying to say. And let me finish by explaining the connection, in my mind, between this understanding and the future, because I don't want just to talk about the past. if you don't think that the Zionist movement is a settler colonial movement, for example, if you open the website of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you can see the Israeli narrative. The Israeli narrative is that Israel is a state built by the Jews who were expelled by the Romans 2,000 years ago, came back to their homeland, and all these nasty people, most of them Palestinians, but not all of them Palestinians, are trying to expel them from their legitimate homeland. And therefore, there is a conflict. Now, if you accept this, if you think that someone can come to your house in Barcelona, in, what's the name of the street here, Girona? Girona 25. Someone knocks at the door, Girona 25, at midnight, and says, "Excuse me, Mr. Pascual, I used to live in your house 2,000 years ago." And you say, it's midnight. Come in the morning, I will call the nice doctor, and he will give you something. And instead of the doctor, the guy comes with a policeman. And the policeman said, you know, the guy has a document from 2,000 years ago that shows that your house belonged to him. So you have to give him at least half of the house. And you say, what are you talking about? This is crazy. I said, no, this is the United Nations has decided that half of your house in Girona 25 belongs to him. He said, I don't care if he was here for 2,000 years ago. I said, no, you have to care, because the United Nations decided it belongs to him. But if you accept it, then of course settler colonialism does not sound relevant to you. But let's say that you are a good liberal European, and you say, okay, you know, I heard both sides. The Europeans like to think that they are balanced. They're the most imbalanced people in the world, but they like to think of themselves as mature, balanced people. So they say, let's hear both sides. The guy with the 2,000 years, it's a good story, and we accept it. But also the guy who says that the guy that tells the story of the 2,000 years is crazy is also right. Okay, if both are right, we are Europeans, we are Western, we are logical, all these Arabs are irrational, we are the rational people. We will divide the house, namely Palestine. We'll give half of it to them and half of it. This is the two-state solution. It's a colonialist idea, partition. You cannot think that an anti-colonialist liberation movement would accept the idea of partitioning its homeland. Can you imagine the FLN in Algeria saying to the French, okay, you know what, you can have half of Algeria? Impossible. If people blame the Palestinians for not accepting the generous idea of giving up half of their homeland in 1947, they don't understand the Palestinian perception. Now, it may be a mistake because later they lost much more, maybe. But don't tell me that it was not a logical position at the time. Now, the whole idea that today you can build a solution which is a reconciliation that can really solve this 100 years of ethnic cleansing and the anti-colonialist struggle against ethnic cleansing by creating a small Bantustan in the West Bank and another small Bantustan in the Gaza Strip, and not allow the Palestinian refugees to return, and recognize Israel as a Jewish state over 80% of Palestine, and believe that this is something that would end the struggle, really, this has no bearing or no connection to what goes on the ground. For me, the only way forward of any settler colonial project is what was attempted in South Africa. I say attempted because not everything in South Africa is working as it should do. Of course, there's still many, many problems in post-apartheid South Africa. But at least the basic idea was right. You don't divide the land between the settlers, even third generation of settlers, like myself, and the third generation of natives living under settler rule. You don't divide. The division, the land, partition of the land is not the issue. The issue is the privileges that the settler community has and the lack of any basic rights that the native people have. So even if you have a nice Palestinian flag in Ramallah, you have not solved the imbalance between privileges and rights. Now, I know how difficult it is because I visited South Africa and I studied it. It's very difficult to come to people with privileges and tell them, give it up. Who would give up voluntarily their privileges? The only way people will give up privileges is if you force them to give up privileges. And the only way, I don't like to see war, I don't like to see violence, and I hope that pressure, which is non-violent, will convince the Israelis that they have to give up some of their privileges if they want to live in peace and reconcile with the people whom they colonized and abused for more than 100 years. So I talked for 32 minutes. I think I'll stop here. I think either I intimidated enough or I don't know. We'll see. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for your conference, small conference, but we have now quite time to discuss and to have questions. You give us some very interesting clues, very important to understand the last developments from this settled colonial project and nature of the State of Israel. Well, now we will start a first round of questions. Then we will recollect of the questions, and afterwards we will have a second one.
Thank you very much for your lecture. Very, very interesting talk, and yeah, I am very much in agreement with everything you said. I have a question. You were talking about the young generation of Palestinians, activists and scholars and academics. And I would like to know, since you studied the entire conflict so well, like what is there that they can do? What can we also do as balanced Europeans or not balanced Europeans? Yeah, like what is, because as you also said, the conflict is in a deadlock kind of. Gaza has been bombed just recently, and like there's a lot happening, so, and it's really stuck. So what is there that also, especially also Palestinians from the outside, like the ones who managed to escape this prison can do? Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your talk. It was really, really interesting. My question is more about BDS, not that much about Zionism, but I had the pleasure of going to Haifa and live there for a while, and I could meet a lot of Palestinian youngsters that when we talked about BDS, they put me kind of in a conundrum because they said, you are boycotting Israel, but we live here, so we also suffer from your boycott against Israel. So it was like kind of a dilemma that I never I've never solved. I don't know if you have an opinion or.
Oh, I do.
Thank you.
You think I don't have an opinion about everything?
I meant like.
Even on things I don't know, I have an opinion, but on this one I do. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Questions?
Well, thank you very much also to the organizers and Mr. Ilan Pappé for the lecture. Well, as you pointed in your speech, the situation there between Israel and Palestine is possible because the international frame allows it. I would like to focus on the Jewish or Zionist lobbies in the United States, because it's mainly the United States who allows this in the frame of the Security Council, and what's the movements that are taking place in this there. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We take two more and then we will continue.
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much for your lecture. You said that Jews accepted the partition plan knowing that Palestinians will reject it. Mm-hmm. Are we living a repetition of history with the so-called US deal of the century? What do you think are the prospects for Palestinian contestation to this plan if finally implemented?
Yeah, good.
And the last one in the first round.
Okay, thank you very much for your talk.
Yeah.
I would like to ask you about being valid as a new historian, because I don't know how comfortable you are with this term, because, for example, in one of your books, you don't use new historians, you say post-Zionist, if I'm not wrong. And I feel like the Israeli historians before the new historians movement were so homogeneous that after there was the creation of this movement, like all historians who disagreed to some extent with the Israeli narrative were labeled as new historians, but I feel that there are like very huge difference between, for example, you and I know Tom Seged.
Yeah.
And for example, Edward Said said that you were a new historian, but that you were somehow different from the rest. So I would like to know how.
I hope so.
No, he said.
No, I hope so.
I mean,
yes.
and
Knowing them.
yeah, I would like to know how
Yeah,
comfortable
yeah.
you feel with
Yeah,
being labeled as
definitely.
a
Definitely. Thank you. Great questions and comments. First of all, about the young Palestinian, what can they do, and so on. I said I hinted to some of it. I think that the youth movement of the Palestinian is not unique. It's part of what many people call the youthquake, the youth earthquake. You even experienced it here in Spain. This whole, I would say, crisis of confidence that young people have in existing political system, political leaderships, institutions. We saw it in the Arab Spring. That was the main motive behind the demonstrations in Cairo, Tunis, and so on, and not only there. And I think that this is, on the one hand, a very positive impulse. The impulse to say, you know, we need to think out of the box. We need to provide a different definition, in the case of Palestinians, of the liberation struggle. What does it mean? Because everything we did until now, let's admit it, has failed. It is not working. On the other hand, if you totally throw out of the window institutions, parties, movements, how are you going to make a change? It's very difficult. Like, on one hand, there is a great respect to the idea of real democracy, no need for leadership, direct democracy, almost anarchism even. On the other hand, you want to impact change, and you ask yourself, can you do it? I once gave a talk in Cairo after the first very optimistic year of the revolution, and I said to the activists in Cairo, I said, you are like people who have good water, and you want to take it from one place to the other, but you hate bottles. So you take the water with your hands, and you're surprised that when you reach your destination, the hands are empty. So if you don't like bottles, I said, use something else. But sometimes you need containers. How is this connected to your question? I think that it's time now for the young generation of Palestinians in particular to be involved, and it's beginning to happen, to be involved with Palestinians on the ground. And they're doing it in the cyberspace, in the internet. But to do it beyond the internet, sometimes you waste all your good energy in the internet, but things have to be done on the ground. And there are some initiatives. For example, people who study abroad have more time to think about strategy. People who need to save their house in Halil, Hebron, need a solution for tomorrow morning. They cannot wait for a PhD on how to defend their homes against fanatic Jewish settlers. But somewhere in between, there has to be a strategy. So I think that there, of course, showing solidarity through the BDS and doing conferences is important and has to continue. And we need to influence mainstream media, mainstream academia. We haven't done it yet. So I think that is very important. And showing solidarity, the full meaning of solidarity. But I think there is also time to get involved in thinking together, how do we change the reality? How do we fight this international umbrella that allows Israel to continue to do what it does without any condemnation? How is it that if you ask people in Spain or in Europe, they would ask for their governments to take a far tougher position against Israel? How do these politicians get away with it? How do they succeed in totally ignoring what the civil society here in Spain and other countries think about Palestine? How is it possible? Even America is a case in point, but I'll get back to this. The second point is about the 48 Palestinians, or the Israeli Arabs, Israeli Palestinians, and BDS. I agree with you. It's first of all, you use the word conundrum. I think it is. I have my own, I'm very active in the BDS. I was very active at the beginning. I have some criticism about it, because I think that by definition, almost every Palestinian in Israel becomes a normalizer. Not collaborator, but at least a normalizer. And I think the BDS movement is a very adaptive movement. It's a very democratic movement. And I think that there are people who are engaged in it are aware of this problem. And they will find a way out of it. It's a problem. You're absolutely right. I think one of the ways it's going to change is because, if you look at the history of the Palestinian national movement, the Palestinians inside, the 48 Arabs, never took a major part in strategizing for the whole Palestinian national movement, right? At first, it was the people in the refugee camps who built the vision for the future. Then, after Oslo, it moved into the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. I think we are facing the third phase, where the Palestinians inside, especially the young Palestinians inside, are going to play a far more important role in redefining the Palestinian Liberation Project and adapt it to the 21st century. And I think that will also help this conundrum that you're speaking about. But it is something where you should talk about it openly. I talk about it openly. And we have some legitimate debates within the BDS movement about it. I think that people who don't live there don't understand fully what it means to be a Palestinian citizen of Israel. If you boycott a Palestinian theater in Haifa, which the government anyway wants to close, what are you doing? What are you doing, right? And through the case studies, you understand much better the principles sometimes. You understand, but it's a very open-minded movement, the BDS. So I think it will find a way dealing with this reality. The lobbies in America. First of all, you said it's only in America. I can tell you from England, the Zionist lobby is strong also in Spain and in England, and not only in America. It's a very powerful advocacy group. Actually, the Zionist lobby in America, or the Israeli lobby in America, has a problem with the Jewish community. Because the same thing I said about young people in the world and politics is true about young American Jews. And Israel is losing the young Jewish generation. It's really losing it. I'll tell you a story, not a story, an anecdote. Israel has a big program called Discovery, Taglit in Hebrew. They bring young American Jews to Israel, show them Israel, and they hope that they will immigrate to Israel as a result. Now, in the first time that they brought the groups, they showed them the West Bank and the checkpoints and the fence. So quite a few young American Jews who participated in this program became activists with the BDS. So now Israel takes them from the airport, takes them to Tel Aviv, to a nightclub, and brings them back to the aeroplane quickly so that they don't see anything else. They have a problem. The biggest lobby in America is not the Jewish lobby. It's the Christian Zionist lobby. These are the Christian fundamentalists. There are millions and millions of them. Bush is connected to them. The young Bush was connected to them. Trump is connected to them. Michael Pence is one of them, the vice president. As you know, these are people who believe that the return of the Jews to Palestine is part of God's will, and that the return of the Jews will bring the Messiah, Jesus Christ, back, will resurrect the dead, and that the Jews will convert to Christianity or they will be shish kebabbed in hell. And so they are anti-Semitic. They're anti-Semitic Christians, but they support Israel, which is not a new phenomenon. It was there before. And it's very difficult to change the minds of these people. People who talk directly with God every day are not easy to change. And they are the strongest lobby for Israel. These anti-Semitic Zionists are the power base of Israel. It will not be easy to change them. I think I'm much more optimistic about the young Jewish community, not only in America, everywhere. Israel is very difficult to sell today to a young liberal Jew in America. What are you selling to them? That in the name of Jewish survival, you can kill Palestinian babies, you can demolish houses. It doesn't work with the young generation. They know too much, and they have a moral backbone that is not helping Israel. The deal of the century. No, I don't think the Palestinians will ever accept it. Even Abu Mazen will probably not be able to accept it. To be fair, we don't know yet the full details, but in this time and age, we know. And it accepts the Israeli position that the status quo is a good thing. So what you have is not a bad basis for the future. You need to do some corrections. For example, you need not only to build a big prison for the Palestinians in the West Bank and a big prison for the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, you need to give the inmates a lot of money so that they will be happy to live in a prison. Or Prozac, money or Prozac, or LSD. I don't know what they think that they can give the Palestinians to make them happy to live in what I call the biggest prison on earth. It's shameful to see Arab regimes taking part in it, willing to give the money for it. It will not work. It will. I give it 1 month before we will forget it ever existed, the big deal of the century. Like many things that Trump is doing, he doesn't think much, and when he thinks, it's not much. But I don't think this is an issue. I think the issue, actually, I'm much more worried about the Democratic president. They will go back to Obama, who was not better than Trump when it came to Palestine. That's my worry. My worry is that we will all say, oh, thank God, this idiot is not anymore the president of America, and now we have an educated, intelligent president who will continue to support, like all the American presidents, will support Israel and not care about the Palestinian interests. And that will be much more difficult to fight. The new historian. You're right. It's not a good term. New history in different contexts means different things. It's new history in Germany and Italy, as you know, meant that people said, oh, we were not that bad in the Second World War. A new history in America meant America was quite aggressive in the Cold War. So new history means different things. The term, when Benny Morris coined the term in 1988, back then, he was right to notice that a certain group of Israeli professional historians corroborate the Palestinian narrative. And it became new in that sense, that he was accepting certain chapters in the Palestinian narrative. But it was not an intellectual movement, it was not a movement. And we each went in our own way. And that's why it took me time to understand that the position here is not a different academic position. It's first and foremost a different ideological, moral position. It is also a different academic position. People like to attack me when I say historians cannot be objective. The Israelis are very happy when I say it. They say, you see, we told you. He admits he's not an objective historian, and therefore everything he says is not correct. We are Zionist Jews who write Zionist history, and we are objective. I say, yes, you are an example for objective. You say your ideology, and you write your own ideology's history, and you are objective. But it's also an academic position. Of course, it is an academic. It's a position that believes that we tell history in order to empower ourselves. We write history in the name of a cause. It doesn't mean that we fabricate, but it means that, yes, the reason I'm writing about the Palestinians is because I care about the Palestinians. People say, if you care, then you're not objective. No, I say, if you don't care, don't write about the Palestinians. Who needs you? What's the good thing about someone who doesn't care about someone who would write your history? History is a bit like going to psychoanalysis. You need to know your own history and the things you are hiding in your history to deal with things that you don't talk about, with the problems that you have in your life. It's not different. Humanity is like an individual. It's not different in that respect. So I agree with you, and I don't use the term new history anymore. I like once they used to call us the young historians. I liked it. I thought maybe it would stay with me. Even when I'm 64, people would say, he's the young historian. Some people still write. He's one of these young Israeli historians. I'm very happy about this. This I don't want to change. But I agree, the new historians we can change, yeah. Thank you.
Yes, we can collect other questions. And we have 15 minutes. Yeah.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
I read a few articles about the gentrification process that is happening in traditional Palestinian neighborhoods near Jerusalem, where this process is happening by expelling the original population, replacing them, but keeping the original Palestinian buildings. So they are keeping the aesthetics, but expelling the identity of the neighborhood. And I would like to ask if this process is happening all around Israel, or if what's happening is a combination of erasing culture and appropriating this culture. And that's all.
Yeah,
Thank you.
very good question. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
First of all, I want to thank you because I think it was 10 years ago you came to the University of Barcelona and you talked about the Red House in Tel Aviv and you changed my life at that day because it's like...
I'm not sorry, I'm happy, maybe.
The pieces of the puzzle came together and I asked you then at the end of your conference and I said exactly what somebody asked you before, what can we do here in Europe? And you told me Europe is very important because it's a mirror to the Israeli public. Right. Although the US is power and money, it's still very important for the Israeli public. So I was recalling your answer. Yeah. And also I wanted to ask you about, what happened today. I mean, we know it's a settler colonialism society. It won't give up its privileges without outside pressure. The question always comes up, are there any inside contradictions within the Israeli society? Mm-hmm. Today we see that Lieberman wanted to force his law forcing the Haredim to go to the army. Do you see any, well, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
There is no more questions.
Okay. Thank you. Two very good questions. Gentrification, first of all, occurs not only in Jerusalem. It occurs all over Israel. But it's very interesting. It occurs for two different reasons, and sometimes they are combined. Part of it is neoliberalism. It's a different economy. So, for example, you can see a very bizarre phenomenon in Jaffa, where there is accelerated gentrification of the old city of Jaffa. You can be invited, which drives me mad, but what can you do? You can be invited to almost an anti-Zionist meeting in a neighborhood that is gentrified. because the people who do the gentrification bought the houses there because they are cheaper than in Tel Aviv, and somehow, with all the right ideological analysis, do not see the connection between their personal action and the wider picture. They analyze the wider picture perfectly, but they don't think that their own personal act is problematic. Or maybe it isn't. I don't know. We have to judge it. I'm just saying that this is it can show you that people can come through gentrification from different ideological positions. But the worrying gentrification, the really one, is the one from above. And it's part of, for me, it's part of the major ethnic cleansing operation I was talking about. It's part of what I call the incremental ethnic cleansing. They do it differently in different places. Jerusalem, it's the most cynical one. In Jerusalem, it's done by the name of societies supported by the government who want to see whether they can find homes that belong to Jews in 48. Because as you know, in 48, because of an agreement between the Israeli army and the Jordanian army, Jerusalem was divided into two. And some Jewish people who lived in the eastern part of Jerusalem until 1948 were under agreement, very small numbers compared to the millions of the million Palestinians, moved to the west of the city, and Palestinian families are being kicked out from these homes in the name of the right of return of these Jewish, so-called Jewish refugees, if you want. Now, of course, one could even say, okay, you know what, if this is the case, give all the Palestinians who were kicked out from West Jerusalem back their homes. We're not talking about, in this case, we're talking about 7 or 8 Palestinian families. In the case of West Jerusalem, we're talking about 40,000 people. But the Israeli government says, no, there's a difference. Why there's a difference? God knows, but they say that there is a difference. And this leads, that's one way of gentrification. It's an ideological Judaization of East Jerusalem. Now, of course, Zionism also always worked that way. You take, supposedly, and I don't think it's legitimate, but supposedly they say to themselves, it's legal to take the house of 5 families in Sheikh Jarrah. Now comes, it's an old Zionist trick. What they do, they say, these 5 houses are in danger because of the hostile environment. And therefore, you have to evict also the houses around them. And then you put Jews in the houses around them. You say, oh, the people who live in the houses around them are in danger because they have Palestinian neighbors. So you have to move the other. And they're doing it all the time. There's some NGOs of Israel have brilliant maps to show exactly how it's done. But it's done differently, for example, in Akka, beautiful city. That still has a large Palestinian population inside the old city. And Israel wants to kick them out and to turn Akko as much as they can into a Jewish city. So they encourage people to settle in, and again, to use the same excuse, saying, oh, the Jews living, they don't feel safe among Palestinians. And they even do it in the name of the reconstruction of the old city. They want to bring back the glory of the Crusaders in Akka. They have already destroyed, I'm part of a committee, we're trying to stop it. They're destroying some of the most beautiful architectural buildings of Palestine. They've already destroyed some of them. Akka really needs saving. Akka needs saving because we don't have much time before they will Judaize the whole of Akka. So gentrification in Israel in most of the time is ideological, but there is also gentrification like in the rest of the world where young people from the middle class move to cheaper places and make them more expensive. And the cheaper places in Israel is where Palestinians live. So the two processes are together. But I would analyze it still within settler colonialism. By the way, settler colonialism and neoliberalism quite often work hand in hand in the 21st century. The last question about Europe. Yeah. You said few important things there. Let me begin with one thing. One is about Europe. It has a lot to do with the fabric of the Israeli society. But I think even a third generation of Jews who came from Arab countries are dying to be Europeans. To be Americans, it's easy. You eat McDonald's, you see a Hollywood film, you say it's a good film, and you're an American. To be European, it's much more complex, at least in the external image. It's far more civilized, it's much more cultured, and so on. And the Israelis really want to be part of Europe. They are part of America, but it's not enough for them. They go to the Eurovision, they go to play football in Europe. They have a dream that there will be an earthquake that will take Israel away from the Arab world and annex it to Malta, or even better, to Norway, if it's a big earthquake. And this is something that Europe should have used, I hope it's not too late, to our advantage, is by saying, with all the corruption that we have in European politics and all the bad things, there are certain ethos and there's certain standards we're trying to keep, and you are violating each one of them. And you are violating each one of them. I mean, I would have expected that this pan-European cultural institution, they're not doing it, to say that, at least in the name of morality, forget about real politics. We know that they don't go together, but in the same morality. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done there. It is shameful to see that Israeli so-called human rights lawyers are invited to universities in Europe to advise how to deal with immigrants, because they know how to deal with immigrants. Who are the immigrants in Israel? The native Palestinians are the immigrants. It's unbelievable. I mean, once you deconstruct the role Israeli academics and advisors play in Europe, it's offensive to your intelligence, and it's outrageous. It is outrageous that Israel, on the basis of its experience of oppressing the Palestinians, knows how to deal with Muslim immigrants. If you think about it, it's sick. It's sick. It is really sickening, but it's accepted. The second thing you talked about, the inside Israel, whether there are a lot of internal contradictions. And Israelis are always worried what will happen if they don't have an enemy, or if the enemy is defeated, totally defeated. Then they have all these inside problems. I would say two things about it, which make me hopeful, but in the long term, which I think will break the Zionist society from within, not just from the outside. Two things. One, there is the beginning, which wasn't there before, of an alternative anti-Zionist culture among the Jewish society, especially the young Jewish society. It's never reported in the press, nobody writes about it. It's small, it's not very big, but it's effective. And the reason it grew up is because the left Zionist has disappeared. Anyway, you cannot be a left colonizer. You cannot be a nice ethnic cleanser. You cannot be a liberal oppressor. And you cannot be a left Zionist. It's impossible. And this fabrication has disappeared. Today in the Knesset, there's the same number of left Zionist parties as Palestinian parties. 10 members. That's what is left of the left in Israel. 10 members of parliament. We should keep an eye on them because they are extinct creature, and maybe for posterity, historians would like to see how a left Zionist looks like, so we should keep some of them alive. But they are disappearing, and instead of them comes an alternative society through NGOs. It's not big, but it's important. These are young people who refuse to go to the army. They don't only refuse to go to the army, they go and help the Palestinians on the ground as much as they can. If they are not that strong, they leave Israel, which is also okay. They leave Israel. This is an alternative. You can show your alternative view on the Zionist state by saying as a young person, I'm not part of this story. This is not what life is all about. Sometimes it's because, you want to live good life. Sometimes because you have some moral background. You know, I said to my sons, you can stay only if you fight. If you want to live, which is okay, if you want to live good life, what you call anarchism, but actually you are lazy. If you want to live good life, do it in Spain, not in Israel. Which is legit. I will not disown you. You are my sons. You are entitled. You don't need to do what I do. But if you stay, and this kind of realization is at the heart of this alternative. Now, it's very small, and I don't know if it will, but I have a feeling it will be effective. And the second thing I would say, there is a difference in Israel between macroeconomics and microeconomics. In macroeconomic terms, Israel is very successful in the OECD. It's the only country that didn't have a banking crisis in 2008 in the OECD. But on if you check it microeconomics, it is the country in the OECD with the biggest gap between those who have and haven't. There is a polarization. There is a system by which people can hardly finish the month. This kind of an economy that is working only for a quarter of people, for many years worked, because 25% is a lot. 25% of Israelis live better than anyone in Spain. But 75% live much worse than anyone in Spain. And somehow 25 is a lot. I didn't know it. I am not an economist, but it turned out to be enough to keep it alive, but not forever. Not forever. And people would ask themselves these questions, I think. But for that, you need the pressure from the outside. You need Europe to play an important role, because you can see what America is bringing to the game. And you need a united Palestinian position, of course. We should not forget this. Without a clear Palestinian united vision for the future, even the most committed anti-Zionist Israeli Jew can do very little if he doesn't know what the Palestinians want and what they want from him or her. And I think this connects to the first question we asked, what can young people do? And I think this whole thing we need to build a kind of an ANC, but the modern ANC, because the ANC took also, also the white who knew that apartheid is wrong, together with the liberation. And there are now 6 million Jews in Palestine, historical Palestine. You cannot kick them out. You have to take them into account. But you have to take them into account within a democratic system and tell them it will not be nice. You will have to give up a lot of things that you think that belong to you. But it's better for everyone, even for you. In the end of the day, it's better for you to live like this, because otherwise you'll find yourself all the time fighting a fight that one day you may not win. All right, thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much. I think that we must leave already because the room must leave it at 8. Thank you very much. It was very interesting, and you give us a little hope for the future and continue to fight
I hope
for
so.
Palestine.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. What's the name? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So.